Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for allowing us to talk to you. As I said, I've done this before, and it's always we always get some interesting questions. So my name is Salim Badata. I'm previously the head of information governance, but I've changed my role slightly. But in terms of the input, I had the data protection function, information governance, and data protection function for Guy's and St Thomas's. Paul Merrison is our head of information security and risk. He key person. He will also be doing part of the presentation, and between us, hopefully, we'll give you some information that will be useful to you in your engagement with the NHS. So let's see if I can get the move slide on. Okay. Just let me know if things will move on, but just to let you know, just a quick look at the agenda. We're going to talk particularly about the Data Protection Act and data protection principles. Apologies if you already know those things, but it's actually very much a fundamental baseline for which the NHS works. I'll also mention the new Data Use and Access Act. I'll talk briefly about the ICO and NHS England. Paul will go through the cyber security stuff, and we will finish with data protection. Look at specifically around data protection impact assessments, which are very important, and around contracts and data transfers. So, just quickly, I won't go through it in detail, and then hopefully most of you will have hopefully already know something about data protection. So, UK GDPR. Data Protection Act 2018 go together. So GDPR was passed while we were in the EU. It was incorporated into the Data Protection Act 2018. So the principles sit within GDPR, but the enforcement and everything sits under the Data Protection Act. So that's why sometimes you'll see UK GDPR, sometimes you'll see DPA, Data Protection Act 2018. The key one I'm going to talk about, just to mention really, is the number one. It actually underpins the whole, underpins every other principle. So personal information. So just to realize, just to let you know, just to realize that personal information is what we're talking about. We're not talking about particularly non-identifiable data. We're talking about personal sensitive data, and there is a bit of leeway in that. We're also talking about making sure that personal data not only includes written, but includes photographs, videos, recordings. And when I talk about information processing, which I will a lot, legally it means anything you do with data or personal information, you even viewing it, is called processing under the law. So it's just the way the law terms it. So first one said personal information must be fairly and lawfully processed. Now it sounds innocuous enough, but lawfully, I'll take it in two parts. Fairly talks about Article 12 to 23, which talks about enshrining the rights of the data subjects within your processing. So it's about being fair, it's about being transparent, it's about being open, and it's about being making sure you don't use their data for purpose you shouldn't. And lawfully processed refers to everything else. In effect, we're talking, and it's a loaded term. There are other principles there, but I won't read them too much. I won't go through too much. But the key element is that, for example, we talk about data, particularly not for care purposes, being processed must be adequate but relevant, but not excessive. So it must be just enough for what you want to do. It must be accurate, up to date, and secure. And there's rules around retention, and of course, rules around how about data subject rights. So with people whose data you're dealing with have lots of rights, and there's quite a few articles in there already. And finally, I'll talk about that, about information being transferred to other countries with that as well. UK GDPR, if you take away one thing, and again, UK GDPR and Data Protection included one of the key things was privacy by design. Hopefully you've heard that term before, but it is something that I ask people to say, if they take away nothing else, you take away that. When you design a process, a system, a way of processing data, where data flows, you have to enshrine privacy into the way you design systems and data flows. That's what the law says. Now, it doesn't tell you how to do it. It's not black and white in that way. And this is why, there are interpretation, but that's why we have IG experts and IS experts who can interpret that for you. The other thing around, just to note that I will mention is data protect impact assessments, which are quite prevalent in the NHS and mandated more or less for us. So every time we look at processing personal information for either for new or risky purpose, we have to do an impact study. It's a risk assessment, that's all it is. The other principle I just want to bring to your attention is accountability. Not mentioned very often, but when you process data, whether for the NHS or not, have to prove that you're processing data suitably and using the data protection rules. And you've got to prove that. And that's the principle, that's accountability principle 6 in the new law. And of course, what's interesting, of course, about it is it brought up fines and sanctions. And those can be significant. So, for example, recently, you may have heard that I think 23andMe got fines of, I think, 2.5 million. And I think Advanced Computer Systems, another 3 million. Various small companies like a law firm got fined, small amount, 60,000, but enough. And it wasn't necessarily breaches they were fined for. It was for actually not adhering to data protection principles, not processing their clients' information safely and securely, and a breach happened. And of course, what it introduced was around the need for a contract, which sounds obvious, but it wasn't always there. Just to mention the new kid on the block is the Data Use and Access Act, just gone through Parliament. It amends the Data Protection Act and the Privacy and Electronic Communications Act, which you hopefully should be aware of, but it doesn't replace them, it adds to them. So unfortunately, the plan was that the Data Use and Access Act was meant to help innovation, and it is, in some cases, it will help innovation. So for example, it will allow the NHS working with partners like yourself more leeway in how we use personal information. And for example, how we take consent, the automated decision-making rules. I mean, it's interesting whether it seems a relaxation or not. So for example, that's particularly about AI. But all the caveats still talk about these you have to continue to apply appropriate safeguards and legislation. The other thing to note is if you provide services to children, the Act requires you to take need into account when you decide to use a personal information. You should satisfy the requirement with the ICO's age-appropriate design code. So that's actually quite important to note. But also note that the Data Protection Act and GDPR, UK GDPR, put in special provision around processing of children's information. So children being people about 13 and under in terms of data processing. So, it talks about parental permissions, etc. Most of you will be offering products that will, leverage AI. But just to let you know, just like you, that AI is still applicable. The AI doesn't take away the rules under UK GDPR. So the legal basis still has to be given. It still has to be fair and lawful. Still have to look at transparency and subject rights, and you've got to have a data protection impact assessment. So you will, when you're working with NHS, one of the key things is you work with us and you will do a DPIA and other things. In terms of the ICO, and again, the ICO is our regulator, and actually it has quite a few powers. It is a statutory regulator and has the power to fine, enforce, direct, and provide enforcement notices to across the UK. It covers all these areas. So it covers the environmental regulations, law enforcement, provision of electronic services, even across the UK. And we are step in step with the EU on, for example, on the identification services. It talks about freedom of information, which is a particular bane of the public sector, where people can request information which isn't necessarily personal, but they can request information about what we're doing, and we do get a lot of those. Um, they will also regulate you on, for example, sanctions on breaches of direct marketing, and those are for some of the biggest fines that are now coming up at the moment. They it's just and also they help develop the framework for information systems and data protection and law enforcement. The Department of Health. Now, Department of Health, the NHS comes under the umbrella of NHS England and Department of Social Care. We work in a kind of a delegated manner, but we work within a plan. The most recent plan, if you look on the website, is the 10-year health plan for England, Fit for Future. And what's interesting is the dramatic language you'll see. And this reflects the sort of the new government's stance and the new health secretary. And they use terms like reform or die to talk about NHS, or the NHS stands at an existential brink and must adopt new models of care. I mean, it's dramatic. But hence, bottom line, I've been in the NHS for a while, and every government said the same thing every year. But there is a difference this year. They are saying science and technology will be key to reinvention. So really, that brings you all into the scope of things. This is your opportunity, because we are mandated to use science and technology and innovation to make sure we can provide better care. I'll hand over to Paul at the moment, Paul Merson, just to talk about cybersecurity now. Paul, do you want me to drive the slides, or are you okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah, I'll just say next slide. Yeah, thank you, Salim. Okay, so yeah, good afternoon. So first off, it's really probably useful just to set out the landscape that we're operating in across the NHS. So the NHS England set up the cyber resilience strategy towards 2030, which sets out a number of pillars for securing and building cyber resilience across the whole of the NHS and social care by 2030. It's important to notice that we within the NHS, so GSTT as an example, we have a governance structure in place where our board recognises cybersecurity as being a significant risk to organisations. And both our board directors, executive directors, and non-execs are actually accountable for the security of our systems. Now, the NHS has made a number of revisions over the years to its Data Security and Protection Toolkit, which was formerly called the IG Toolkit, the Information Governance Toolkit. That is now aligned to the National Cyber Security Centre guidance for cybersecurity practice. And it's important to recognise that a lot of the aspects of that guidance will cascade down onto suppliers over the next few years. So the NHS England rolled it out for NHS trusts this year. They will be pushing those requirements down for NCSC to suppliers. So one of those components of resilience is really building secure by design. So the expectations are that all the digital solutions that we have, including health tools, are developed and maintained with those principles of secure by design. And where appropriate, we can actually have those integrated into our threat monitoring, etc. We're also expected as organisations, NHS organisations, to manage the risks within our supply chain. So, if you're engaging with us as a supplier, you might expect to receive a questionnaire on security aspects relating to your product for you to answer. We'd also expect to understand what type of engagement we'd have to have with you if there was a particular incident arising with your solution. And also, obviously, data protection, which Salim has already spoken about. And depending on the solution, we may well wish to have regular security assessments to give us some assurance. And obviously, as organisations, we have to deploy, awareness and training across our users and also our suppliers. So could we have the next slide, please, Salim? Thank you. So what are we really looking for from you in terms of certification and compliance? If you're handling sensitive data and critical services, we'd expect you to be maintaining Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus certification. Our preferred is Cyber Essentials Plus because that gives us some assurance that you've had an independent penetration test. of your infrastructure. So that may not be the product you're offering, but it might be the environment you could be developing your product in as well, because obviously that could, an insecure environment could lead to issues in the future. We'd expect suppliers to be aligned to the CAF framework, so it's worth going away, perhaps having a look at the National Cybersecurity Centre CAF framework and seeing how you stand up against that as an organisation, and work through any improvements you might wish to make in that area. We'd also be looking to make sure that you apply risk management, to your product. So you're looking at the cybersecurity controls that your product currently has, and how they might work for the customer and for yourselves. And in terms of building that secure configuration, making sure that your configuration is secure. So for example, if you are using another vendor's product within your solution, so say you're using products from Microsoft, for example, we'd expect there to be some ability to apply patch management to that environment through yourselves, perhaps some support arrangement. And also, if you are looking at longevity of your product, we would probably expect to see, if you're going with Microsoft, for example, the long-term support channel adopted as part of your product as well, so that we can see updates for a prolonged period once that goes out of public support. In terms of access controls, if your product is a cloud-based product, so available on the public internet potentially, we would expect that to be protected with MFA. We'd expect some role-based access controls to really control who can access the product. If it's internally within our network, then generally username and strong password is acceptable, but we would be looking to hopefully integrate, where we can, with things like single sign-on. Again, if your product is using third-party components such as Microsoft, we'd expect some malware protection on those devices. And if that could either be provided by yourselves, or potentially we could get that joined to the Microsoft Defender environment nationally for our particular tenant in our case. And we do segregate. We do have a segregated area where we can put supplier devices, so we can keep an eye on those and any security events relating to those. We've spoken about patch management. We'd expect that patch management process to take place. So that might be for your vendor components of your product, but also maybe some of your own components if you've discovered security vulnerabilities, in your firmware, for example. In terms of incident response, we'd want to understand how we would engage with you if there was an incident. So, we would be collecting, as part of our questionnaire process, your contact details for a cyber incident, so that we knew who to contact and knew how to escalate anything. And then, we would have these questionnaires going through our supply chain assurance process. So, Slim, could you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So really around assurance, what sort of things we'll be looking for when you engage with us. So we will be doing a security evaluation typically, and that might be a process we have internally within GSTT called a pre-acquisition questionnaire, looking at a medical device, for example, or if it's a digital solution, we'll undertake a kind of a security review, or even a system level security policy type review, which will give us some more detail about how the product is perhaps backed up, if it stores data, etc. We'd be looking at your design documentation, so we'd expect some architecture style diagrams to show how that would integrate with our environment, so that we can review that. We'd be looking at those data flows and integration points, so we'd be looking at things like encryption, so making sure that you're using currently supported and non-deprecated encryption protocols. So for example, we'd expect you to be using, if you were using TLS version 1.2 or above at the moment, and not versions 1.0 or 1.1. And then accompanying the TLS, we'd expect you to be using strong encryption algorithms. So we'd expect you to be using things like AES 256. In terms of the security controls, so those controls around your design, which might involve vendor products in terms of patching or firewall rules or that sort of thing, which might be required to operate the product. Again, we'd expect that within the design documentation component. We'd hope that you'll have had your product independently penetration tested We may well want to do some own penetration testing of our own, depending on the scale of the implementation you're doing with us. So we do have an independent tester that does that sort of thing for digital solutions that we implement here. And we may well, if you're using cloud-based services, want some separate assessment. But typically, we would look at the data that's available to us from your cloud service provider, so AWS or Azure, for example. We would be looking at your supplier security posture. So we do monitor our suppliers through a risk assessment tool. So we do look at your security ratings and breach risk. So for example, we can see your external posture. We can see where you may have security weaknesses. And depending on whether that's on a service that you're providing to us, we may well be asking you to look at that and improve it. And we'll also be asking you about your general security practices as well. We would like to get at least some visibility of the processes you've got in place for your patch management and estate, if your solution includes elements such as servers or clients. And also, we need to be engaging with you on how changes would take place as well. So we need to understand the processes in place to make changes. So if your product was being used, even as a proof of concept with us, we would want to know how you're managing changes and how you're informing us of changes so that we can take account of those changes through our change process at GSTT if necessary. And then, looking at risks, once we've done any risk assessment, there may be some risk action plans resulting from some of our findings, which we'd expect to be reviewed. Those risks might be accepted, or they may need mitigation plans if they're critical or high risks that we see to the environment that we have here. And they typically be, driven by whoever you're engaging with the business and yourselves to actually get those scheduled and resolved. So that's it really for me. I'll hand back to Salim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on. I'll put them all back up again. Okay. One of the key things, and this is a slide that we used for a previous presentation, and as part of the previous presentation, I got together a list of the kind of things that were being proposed as part of the innovation that we were working with. Things like, apps and AI and various things, algorithms, use of algorithms, video consultation, learning, those sort of things. What's interesting for me is that this is the reason, we are open to innovation and very much open to innovation, but we do actually take risks very seriously because we are a public body and we're safeguarding your information. And we have been a victim, we have been targeted for cyber attacks. So there's, there are always, there's a price to pay for increased security. So as Paul's mentioned on the bottom left, we talk about data protection impact assessment, and Paul's mentioned SLSP. We also look at whether your contract is compliant. We look at the risks, which are the brown circle at the top, and these are the risks we assess. And these are the framework risks that we look at, which allow us to give us a view as to whether there is additional risk. So for example, AI is a new and interesting one because the black box effect of AI and AI hallucinations, etc. Those sort of things that come up a lot. And what we tend to do is, we make the principles are the blue boxes and they matter. We look at mitigation. So it is actually, it brings it together. Let me just quickly talk, I won't go too far into it, about contracts. One thing is when you work with NHS is the NHS tends to use NHS standard terms and conditions. Actually, my advice to you is, if possible, use them, because NHS T's and C's can be they can be very large, very big. There's a kind of base set, and there are then appendices added on for various elements to it. So for example, for data protection, one of the appendices we look at is the data protection element, data protection protocol, and part of it is, we also look at whether you've achieved other standards or not. In terms of other assurance, I'm going to mention DTAC. You probably heard of it, and there's a link to it in the slide pack. not legally mandated yet, but I would say to you that it is coming. NHS England have done a survey recently around the use of DTAC and trying to rationalize it. And that's supposed to bring together all the standards that Paul's talked about and information governance into kind of one initial questionnaire. So I would suggest you make sure you look at DTAC and whether you can meet it, because that brings together and may become a de facto standard, though as hasn't happened yet. Just a quick thing about, I always mention this about data transfers. We have very strict rules about data, personal data going abroad or going to certain countries. So there are additional documentation that has to be added to the contract if relevant. So we talk about international data transfer agreements, standard contractual clauses, or binding court extra rules. And without going to go too far into it, it's the risk around data going abroad is that the standards of safeguarding personal information for clients, your patients, etc., isn't necessarily as strong in some countries outside the EU as it is and the UK. There are some countries which are considered equivalent, so that's fine, but you still have to do a risk assessment if it's going abroad. You can use an IDTA. It's on the ICO website. The transfer agreement is there, and you don't have to use the whole thing. But again, it's really what you're doing is making sure that the rights and the protection provided to your data, to clients' data, to patients' data, and to sensitive data is of the same standard elsewhere. The biggest problem used to be the USA, funnily enough. But from 2023, businesses can transfer personal data to the US under the data bridge scheme, it's called, a data privacy framework. It's entitled there. Again, it's not an open door. You still have to do a risk assessment, and because the data bridge scheme it's an opt-in scheme for American companies, and they have to opt in and they have to be part of certain sectors. So it doesn't apply to all sectors you'll deal with, but certainly should apply to health sectors, universities, and research organizations. Just a quick, and hopefully, we're glad to know we're nearly at the end. Just to summarize this, without going into too much detail, one of the big pieces of advice I give to suppliers is engage early. So if you want to work with the NHS, engage with the NHS early, because as you can see, there is a lot of overheads that you have to worry about in terms of data protection and information security. They're not insurmountable. They're actually very doable. And in fact, bottom line, they are the same standards you will need to engage with anyone you sell your product to. Yeah. And the DSPT, the Data Security Protection Toolkit, Paul mentions one of the standards we look for. It's a self-assessment. Again, it's worth looking at. And again, it gives us some assurance that you've looked at security. It's all about risk management for the NHS, yeah, and I think that's what you've got to take away from here. So we are not looking at eliminating risk. That's impossible. What we look for is to mitigate and minimize risk to, and particularly in this case, to personal information. As you'll know from the headlines, we've had quite a few attacks on the NHS, most recently, for example, on the big lab supplier across most of London, Synovis. A huge amount of data was compromised. Unfortunately, that's the environment we work in. So we're fighting a battle to make sure we have the controls in place. But that's in addition to UK GDPR, which talks about data subject rights and the framework. So, final advice, work with the information security and the governance teams within the trust you want to market. We are open to suggestion. We're open to talk to you, and we're open to providing you advice and help. It's a two-way street. So, and the final good piece of news is that any assurance compliance work you do for one organization is completely transferable to another. Thank you very much. So I think that's the end of the presentation. I'll stop sharing the screen. But I think, we've got time for questions and discussion. So I'll stop sharing, Sam. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. All right, we'll make a start. We're really pleased to have Cass Gibson with us today. So Cass is the head of ethics and information governance at the AI Centre for Value-Based Healthcare. I assume, Cass, you might tell us a little bit more about what that involves at the AI Centre. So but we're really kind of interested to hear what you've got to say to us about data standards and ethical considerations for the use of data and particularly in AI. So I will hand over to Cass again. I think we're going to have a few opportunities for kind of questions and reflections. So again, encourage everybody to kind of get involved in the discussion. As we kind of go along. So I will hand over to Cass.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Cass, and I'll start with an apology. I have been an educator for a long time now, and I made a promise to myself over a decade ago that I would never use slideware again when students became infatuated, not with the content of the sessions, but where the slides were, when they could access them, and where they would get them. I have got some things to make up for that, so you won't just see my ugly mug on the screen for the whole time, but if you are after slides, I'm sure this will be recorded. You have to access that. So yes, I work at the AI Centre. I've put a link in there in the chat for you if you wanted to have a look at what that place is and what we do. Tagging on a little bit to the conversation towards the end of the previous session. Essentially, we're a consortium that brings together universities and NHS trusts to get AI research and AI work done. Some of the conversations about the different standards and different approaches between the trusts for certainly at the research and development stage, we are able to bring together trusts so that you have one front door in order to complete and conduct research. It's essentially an ethics and governance wrapper around those things. So if you are trying to work with NHS trusts in order to build products or conduct research, and you're finding yourself explaining to the same thing to a slightly different meeting and a slightly different brutalist architecture built room around the UK, then you could drop in and see what we do. So that's a shameless plug. My job, so by training, I'm a sociologist and a bioethicist. So I was trained at the University of Toronto, PhD in bioethics there. And in addition to my day job, I also chair one of the Health Research Authority recs, which we will talk more about. So I end up dealing with a lot of things to do with ethics, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that might look like and how you can make life easier for yourself. This is going to cross the divide. So for some of you, I appreciate for the products and systems and tools that you're developing, you will potentially be past this stage. But hopefully it's of use for you if you're building new products or when you want to go and retrain or retool any things that you are doing, or if you're in meetings with people like Salim, who are telling you about various systems, NHS requirements, and yet more bureaucracy, you'll be armed with the knowledge to know what the hell they are talking about. So this brings me back to the dark days of COVID. I've got my little drawing screen here, so we'll have a go when I was lecturing from my front room. So you have to, by law, commentate when you start sharing your screen. So I am sharing the screen now. You'll have lots of stuff all over there, but hopefully you should now just have, come on, a blank Word document. Sam, I can see you. Is there a Word document in front of you?
Yes.
Glorious.
There is indeed, yeah.
So let's see how we go. So when we're talking about ethics, in essence, we're dealing with a couple of different things, hopefully. Ultimately, it's about right and wrong and choices that we make, but we're going to make a distinction between what I'll call procedural ethics and practice ethics. You can see I'm out of practice. So in some ways they reinforce each other, but also in lots of ways they are quite distinct. So procedural ethics is all the various bits of bureaucracy, forms, systems, approvals you need to go through in this case, if you want to access any patient data for anything that isn't the provision of care. And so this part of what I'm going to talk to you about today is my bread and butter, but as I appreciate for some of you, this will be background knowledge. But once we get to the practice stuff and data management and mitigation and those factors, it'll become potentially a little bit more applied for you at that stage. So procedural ethics is all the things, then all the systems that as someone who's not British, I feel I'm allowed to be slightly more critical, that the Brits are excellent at inventing and conducting. And actually, based on the conversation you had previously that I caught the tail end of, the procedural ethics in the UK is kind of a success story in that we do have one front door system now through IRAS, and you have a national network, international network if you count Wales and Scotland, that is able to provide a service to review and approve applications for research to be conducted or tools to be developed using NHS data, NHS patients, or NHS staff. And that's really quite critical. So I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment so I can navigate back here. Which one of the key things it's worth checking out and knowing what you're dealing with is another helpful link for you. This is all provided by an organization called the Health Research Authority. And they are also part of the AI and Digital Regulation Service. So the UK and their defence are trying. So you've got a one-stop shop to look at, which brings together knowledge from the Health Research Authority, NICE, the MHRA, and the Quality Care Commission. So the HRA is one of those 4 key bodies that are responsible for the complete pipeline from product development to assessing in use and recommendations for use. So what they do is they provide a service whereby you submit an application for your product or access the data, and they will approve it or not. Something that's really important, and I want to echo some of the conversations that I heard earlier, is that with this kind of work, I've sat on both sides of the fence. I've sat on the side of the fence that's asking for access to data, and I sit as a chair of one of these committees on the side of the fence that's trying to make sure we prioritize and protect patients and their data. So something that you can do that makes your life so much better is actually, where are we going here? Be clear and be real. When we have a chat, I'm going to find one of my favorite comics, which I think sums up a lot of the AI stuff. Let's start with a be real. I'm yet to meet a developer of an AI product, and I meet them all the time as part of my work, who isn't going to, whose product, whose tool isn't going to be revolutionary and solve every single problem that we've ever had. And suddenly I won't be going bald and everyone will be healthier and happier, and it's brilliant. This kind of stuff is brilliant if you're trying to con someone out of money to build your product. It's terrible if you're talking to an ethicist, a hospital, or any kind of committee. So I'm pleading for you to make your lives easier and our lives easier is to be real about the scope and size of the problem that you're actually solving, that you're realistically in a position to be able to solve that problem. And that leads us to being clear. I have lots of meetings, and I do get stuck in that position where someone, a product developer, will be complaining about they've been talking to me for 12 months. That comes to that point there of being clear. I can think of 2 companies that I'm working with at the moment, and I've had probably half a dozen meetings with them to try and support them through the application process and gain access to data. I still don't know what they do. I am not an idiot. My wife might beg to differ, but they're not clear. At one point in time, they're providing a service wrapper for an open source tool. At another point in time, they are using that open source tool in order to be a data broker. At another point in time, this particular company is actually refining a tool that there's no longer open source that they're going to sell to hospitals in order to manage data. So each time we meet, and I've got an understanding of what it is they need to do, the permissions they need to have, the procedural ethics component. Make sure you go here, tell these people this is what you want, this is how it's going to work. They're shifting the goalposts themselves. So my first request then, and I'm sure you've had this a lot, but take a moment just to consider what this will apply to Salim's word as well, is what is it that you actually do really? What's your core functionality? What's your core problem that you're solving? And how are you in a position to actually make sure that this happens? And this is probably feeling quite patronizing to many of you at the moment, but I can promise you that for any kind of procedural ethics, and this can include the Health Research Authority that I mentioned before, or it can be dealing with various NHS committees that you'll need to go through in order to procure any product, is being able to explain what you actually do really in clear, concise, and practical ways. This is one of those things where I'm sure it's like driving. Anyone who drives, none of us are bad drivers. It's always everyone else that's the problem. But some of us have to be bad at some point in time because we're out on the roads together. So while I get my next piece of information ready for you, please just take a moment to think about, be it a business pitch, but reframe for the purpose of procedural ethics is, what is it that you're actually solving? What is your tool doing? And what do you really want? And so I'm going to stop sharing for a moment while I get some more stuff for you. And then if anyone is brave enough to answer those questions for me, it would be interesting for me. This is where I feel like COVID, if anyone was teaching at all, I know probably you weren't involved in that. It was like talking into a fridge for 2 hours at a time. If anyone wants to share exactly what they do, it would be interesting for me to know the audience I'm talking to a little bit more, but also a clear understanding of how important this is, because you need to repeat it for the information governance people, for the ethics people, for the funders, for trying to get someone to buy and implement your product. So I will be quiet. Kevin, I see the hand up in a glorious snowboarding picture, is it?
It is, yeah. I flew 10 years ago. I suppose, what is it you actually do? I mean, are you talking about the technical level? Are you talking from patient's perspective? Are you talking from the clinician's perspective? Because the problem is there's so many stakeholders. It's a different thing for everybody.
It is a different thing for everybody, but now we're getting to a philosophical point, if there is any intersubjective reality, there has got to be some kernel of truth that your tool will provide or do or fix. It will be different in its use. I can think, I'm just desperately looking around my office for something that I can use as a proper and as an example. But, here's a mug is a mug. You can fill it with tea. My wife won't drink coffee. I'll drink coffee out of it. I'm sure we've all thought about smuggling some booze in it while we're in interminable meetings with people with funny accents talk at us. So it can provide different things to different people, but we can still say the purpose of this thing is to make sure you get your beverage of choice in a fairly stylish way that holds, I think, about 250 ml. So that's where I go back to. I think, yeah, keeping it simple. What is it that you're actually, so the same thing, this is like participant information sheets in research, right? We get really excited about people writing a kid's one and then a teenager's one and then a clinician's one. Well, if you write one that everyone can understand, you can then layer in more technical or particular information for the specific audience. But the kernel of what you're doing is great. And we've had someone write in there. So Kevin, carry on. Can you simplify?
Okay, so I mean, so we're in mental health, and what we're doing is we're capturing the contents of a therapy session to empower the patient. That's it.
Perfect, great. And then the second question that would follow from me, or in order to make your ethics journey easier. And we'll go back to the, no, that's not Zoom. That's just the blue thing I've clicked on. Beecher is an established digital health platform providing digital patient monitoring. Excellent. So these are the kind of things that we need to do. Now, if I was on the ethics committee looking at the explanation that we've got in the chat too, my key question straight away, and I steal this from Paul Ingold, would be for all of you to consider. Back to my Word document. Control All, delete. Have to put my stylish glove on so I can use my righty thing. The three follow-up questions, I guess, for all of you. The first one is this. I'm paralyzed with fear about whose it should be. I've got to go. Who's look forward to the pedants. Three questions for implementing any new technology in any workplace at all is what problem are you solving? Whose problem is it really? And that's, I think, Kevin, you led us to that. There's multiple people that you're helping solve a problem for. Perhaps it's the patient so that they know that there's a better record of the kind of things that they've been communicating, or a more accurate record. It might be a problem for them saying, actually, I've got someone who's entirely focused on my conversation rather than anytime we look away. I'm sure we've all been in the meeting, I'm taking a note, and then that changes the dynamic of a conversation because you're wondering why that's important. Whose problem is it really is, I think, one that we try and implement in a place to make sure that the stakeholders are actually engaged and involved and clear. So some of the things that we think of, given our backgrounds, and I'm talking more in terms of socioeconomic status, if we're in this incubator program, we're probably coming from some fairly common backgrounds in that way. We're projecting all our key assumptions about the field, about the practice, about the people that are going to use the tool. Is it solving their problem really? And what problems will you create? So this is quite, this is where I guess the trendy way of just saying that is disruptors, but also we've seen, and we can talk about all the many examples about the kind of problems that we've created through algorithmic bias or displacement of workers is something that people are really keen to either talk about or pretend isn't going to be a thing, because we'll all get different jobs. So those are the three questions that I want you to ask yourself whenever you're trying to think about what it is that you're going to be communicating to an ethics committee, so that they're clear about what you're achieving. They're going to want to know that it's the best kind of solution. One of my favorites so far has been an AI solution that was to do phone call follow-ups for patients as a AI agent, and we can all accept that an AI agent probably isn't as good as a person for the most part. And so the problem was really much more easily solved by, rather than plowing heaps of money into development of a AI solution, was hiring some more people to man the phones. And what problems will you create? So I want to move as a reflexive exercise. I guess that's what our first 20 minutes or so has been, is asking ourselves to reflect quite deeply on what we are doing, because in the development journey, the procedural ethics is often the first place where a developer has been asked to externally explain their project to someone who isn't automatically enthusiastic about the product or the idea. And so we're used to speaking to encouraging and positive rooms, and this might be the first time someone's thought about it and gone, hey, wait a minute, do we really need to do this? And so that's a tip from me, is to be, if you're going through these procedures, to be prepared for critical questions that you may not have been asked before, because you were talking to the converted. And I say that as a very jaded man who's had these conversations before. So with checking out the time, the key things, I guess, to know that anytime you're accessing patient data, but not for care, oh, that's gone back to front, NHS. So anytime you want to access data, but not for the purpose of care, you'll need some approval from procedural ethics. You can get that from the Health Research Authority. And I guess I'm going to put a little plus in here because the NHS, as the data controllers before Salim tells me off, will always have control over that data. This is where you can apply to them directly. You've got all the information you need on that link I shared before. A secondary purpose or approach you can do is to an NHS or somewhere like the AI Centre, where we have been given the authority to give approvals for you to access data. The top tips, in addition to those reflective questions, so top tip 1, be reflective before you start. I'm sure people in the room have been through this process before. One of the key, again, it connects to the conversation you're having before about the slow-moving bureaucracy. As someone who has asked for data and someone has approved access for data, I can promise you that the delay is always, let me caveat that, nearly always, because we haven't taken, as applicants, haven't taken long enough to consider all the various questions, processes, thoughts, the reflective elements of what it is we want to do. We get stuck. And again, as someone who has screamed at the bureaucracy as well as being a key cog within it, of saying it's been with this committee and it's gone back and forth and now I'm presenting to them again and this has taken me 8 months since I first applied. If you give yourself lots of time to go through any of the procedural mechanisms, if you engage with them thoughtfully, carefully, and considerately, that will make things go really, really quickly. Because what happens, and it's well documented, can I get to the chat from here? A little plug for chat. I'm not selling you stuff. I've tried to get it from the publisher's website, but they sell it there directly. A book by Carl Elliott called The Occasional Human Sacrifice. And that's a book that he's documented the development of various aspects of medical research that have been problematic from an ethical perspective. I think it's a great book. You'll be familiar with some of the case studies. You'll be shocked by some of them you won't be familiar with. Sadly, my home country of New Zealand makes a long appearance in one of the chapters. But the key thing is no one thought they were doing anything wrong. In all of those studies where we've had an ethical problem, all of the key researchers, all the people like you that were developing the drugs or the treatments or the interventions, all thought they were doing the absolute right thing. And so that's something to remind ourselves of, is that when we can't be trusted, we have to have external people through these procedural things as researchers to help remind us of where we need to go, what we need to do, and some of the challenges that we'll need to face. So people, because they believe they're doing the right thing, they sit down, they very quickly dash off an application to one of these bodies, and then we get cross when it takes us ages to get things through because we're not clear, we're not answering the questions appropriately with sufficient detail, or we're shifting the goalposts on ourselves. So giving yourself lots of time to thoughtfully and considerately engage with the processes I never thought growing up I'd hear myself defending bureaucracy. I thought I was going to be the kind of guy. I was in a very mediocre, try hard anarchist punk rock band for a while. So the idea that I'm now shilling for bureaucracy is quite amusing to me. But the same as the conversation we had at the end about regulation, the stuff that the organizations and bodies and structures will ask for are things you have to do anyway. Particularly if you're building evidence in order to regulate your device, you're going to have a clear purpose statement, and you should have that before you begin any processes, rather than when you suddenly come around to filling in the framework so that you actually get the evidence that you need in order to register your product. So be reflective about what you're doing and give yourself lots of time to engage faithfully and considerately in the process they will be asking you to go through. By all means, rally against the questions, be cross about how they're asking this for the 6th time, if that's how it feels. But giving yourself lots of time to engage in those processes, to read those documents carefully and give the information that they're asking for, will make this process go infinitely quicker. And bear in mind that we are extremely prejudiced because we believe in the work that we're doing. We're certain it's going to make a positive impact. So we need some help, just as a critical friend, if nothing else, to step outside and think about what we're actually working for and going through. So you'll be pleased to know, are there any, just berated you for 30 minutes. Are there any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? They can be very specific in terms of fill this form in here, but about this procedural ethics and that ethics approvals. To access data, and I'm just going to put that there because that means I'm talking about patient data. So publicly available anonymous data sets are obviously slightly different, but we'll get to those in a moment in the UK. Any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, or rants that people want to share about their experiences through the procedural ethics? And we'll get to ethics in practice in a moment. Right.
There's nothing in the chat. Does anyone want to?
Like I said, I can imagine that part was probably not the most relevant to lots of people in the room, given where you might be with your or product development. So you don't you don't need to have a sympathy question.
No, I've got this is a question that is exercising us at the moment, because what we're doing is really simple, and that's important because mental health is a complete mess. And if you're going to change mental health for the better, you have to be you have to be doing something that's broadly applicable. The problem is we don't appear to be doing anything. And this like, I mean, yeah, I'm looking at your questions and I'm thinking, Christ, if I could only answer those. Because at one level, if I describe it as sort of technical level, what we're doing, it seems trivial, right? But it's dealing with an elephant in the room, and part of the reason it's an elephant in the room is because nobody thinks they've got this problem, but we all have this problem because we're human beings. And it's really simply, we have shit memories. Like really shit. We could fabulate histories to suit the narrative we're facing now, and completely revise them. Like we're throwing those stories away, 99 out of 100 away, and leaving to one. And we're doing that all the time. And the problem is, in mental health, that's a big, big problem, right? And it might be the reason that we haven't moved the needle in terms of treatment across the last 100 years. But that is quite a big paradigm shift. And and essentially you're almost playing like the kid in the Emperor's New Clothes. You're kind of going, hey guys, I'm not sure. So how do you get that message across?
Well, that's if I could answer that, I think I'd be a very wealthy man. But oh, I don't know why, but when you were talking, it just reminded me of a toaster. And I think one of the most genius design solutions ever. Has anyone made a piece of toast and you put the thing down and it won't go down? and it won't go down because it's not plugged in or it's not turned on at the wall. So there's no, that's just the most clever, elegant design solution to a problem I think I've ever seen, because otherwise you wander around and come back and wonder why your toast hasn't cooked. And why that, when you said it seemed very trivial, I think that's why it kicked that into me. But just because it's simple, or focusing on one very specific particular problem, is something to really lean into. Because if there is a specific simple problem that you're looking to solve in a specific and simple way, I think that's something that is really useful in procedural ethics as well as practice ethics, to say we've got a clear and simple problem with a clear and obvious solution. Where I think things go wrong, and particularly because we're in a bit of a hype bubble around AI, and it's like that Maslow's hammer thing, you know, if the only tool we have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, is being clear about, even though it's a simple and elegant solution, and you're dealing with the fact that memory is not good, and then there's also challenging philosophical questions about memory and mental illness as well. When we're recalling events that may be things like hallucinations, what are we actually recalling? Is it a memory? Is it what is that? Because it felt very real for the person experiencing that. Being clear about the problems that we can actually solve or fix. So you mentioned about a paradigm shift. Yeah, I'm sure that's absolutely possible, but maybe the first step is just making sure we've got really accurate records or really accurate notes of particular events, and then that will lead us to an incremental change here. And then at some point we might go through a broader paradigm shift. But I think, yeah, going back to those things is what problem are we solving, whose problem is it really, and what problems are we creating? My favored way. But I think if nothing else, hopefully I won't have wasted your time if the one thing you take away is the idea of being more critically reflective about your product, about your purpose, about your journey. One, at a particular stage, that's to communicate it to any kind of approvals body or someone that wants to buy the product. Two, that's hopefully facilitating some guardrails against the sort of hype bubbles that we get into. And I felt it too, not just me, although there are occasions where I ask a question about how the project is going to work, and the record sort of skips, and I feel like I'm an idiot. But it's been something so obvious, like when you proofread your own work and you miss the spelling mistakes because you know what you wanted to write. And so I think in the development space, and you've got people that are hyping things up and wanting to move things forward, making sure that we've got someone to help with that proofreading is something that's really, I think, really important, and that's something that I kind of enjoy doing. So if anyone wants to chat anymore, go for it. Otherwise, we'll move on. What time are we knocking off, Sam?
We've got till just before 3:30.
Just before 3:30, man. I haven't got material for another.
That's fine. You don't have to use that, but we've got till then. So, but that's fine. But if we finish earlier, we finish earlier.
It's cool.
So I was going to make a quick point. I've actually your first point about I think you said you'd never heard anyone that doesn't think that their solution is going to solve every single problem. I heard someone recently very much talking down their own product, and it was unusual and it shocked me, but I was struck by how brave it was. And actually, with everything going on at the moment, they were trying to win over an NHS stakeholder, and actually I think the simplicity of what they were doing was a big appeal. It also puts that person at ease a little bit, and obviously you don't want to downplay where there are risks, but if there weren't genuine risks with this for a number of reasons. And I just thought it was quite brave, actually, to be more realistic about what they're doing and what the problem is they're solving, but actually trying to, show and as I say, sort of talk it down a bit. It's not complicated what they're doing. It's not, an AI that's going to solve every single problem. But it was quite refreshing to see. And I think, I don't know what the result will be yet, but I think it landed better because I think, it was an honest reflection of what they're doing rather than them just trying to hype it up.
Yeah, so I'm pleased that you have an example of someone doing that, because I'm yet to come across it, because it's all
Very rare.
yeah. So but I think why I made that point and then I didn't follow it through is probably I've taken too many things for assumptions. But the world of information governance and the world of ethics, we think of the policies and procedures, but it's also the people. So an ethics committee is just a group of your peers and some public members as well, discussing and sharing their opinion on the work that you want to do. Now that's great, but it also comes with some basic problems of social psychology, which if our memories are bad, then our interpersonal interactions are almost worse. That if you come in all singing, all dancing, all promising, what happens to any kind of committee structure? And I can get a link for another book. It's Cass's book corner. Is that the committees then start to get, once they find one small problem, they then start to get more twitchy about more things. So if you've ever been in a situation where something has annoyed you and then you voice that main concern, but then you're on another thing, and this is the ball starts rolling. And so I think going into any kind of committee setting or presentation around ethics and information governance, if you're more circumscribed in what it is you're addressing and approaching, the committee as a matter of social interactions become more trusting of what it is that you're doing. Whereas if you're not clear and haven't been through that reflective process, they start looking for all the little problems and just adding everything on and on and on and on. So it becomes a much bigger issue than it needed to be. And this is documented in a book called Trust in the System by Adam Hedgecoe, which again, if you've got if you need some holiday reading, I'm just pulling it up now, but I might not be able to get it from the I think that's from the publisher. Yeah. That documents A, how the ethics system in the UK was built, and B, this researcher was in the room as the conversations were happening, as these decisions were being made. Sorry, my camera's on the blink a wee bit there. Worth checking out. So we'll shift gears slightly then, which is probably more relevant to more of you, is this idea of ethics in practice. And there's a few things that I want to share, including my screen, around that issue. So for us, ethics in practice of procedural ethics, and lots of people get criticized procedural ethics for quite reasonable points about how accurate is it really? Is it a good process? Why do we spend so much time reading these things? Why do committees really get worried about, for traditional research designs? They really spend lots of time on participant information sheets that no one actually reads. So there's lots of good criticisms that we can have about procedural ethics. That's fine. Ethics in practice is the everyday decisions you make that have some kind of moral standing or moral element to it. You can get crazy and start to, not crazy, that's unfair. You can start to really make this incredibly broad. So I was about to say, what breakfast cereal you have in the morning isn't necessarily an ethics and practice decision, but for some people it is. My kids plow through dairy. Like I'm thinking about a second job just so I can keep the milk in the fridge. That has an ethical dimension to it, obviously, in terms of environmental aspects and animal welfare and all those kind of things, but they're not approaching that from an ethical dimension. So ethics in practice is anytime, I think that's a surprisingly a good example, because you can do this purposefully, in that you are making an ethical decision, or you can be unaware and you are making an ethical decision, or there's an ethical element to your decision no matter what you do, but that's not forefront in your mind. That can be okay. I don't think people will certainly disagree with me. I don't want to wade into animal politics, but whether we're having milk on our cereal or not has an ethical dimension. Perhaps it should have a higher ethical framing in our household, but it doesn't. Either way, we're making a decision that has some kind of ethical element. So when we're developing tools or selling them or organizing them or dealing with data, we want to make sure that these ethics in practice, they're as purposeful as possible, that we're not making them in ways that we're unaware of the elements or aspects that are impacting or have an ethical dimension to them. When I say things like ethical dimension, I'm going to borrow heavily from the most widely cited and therefore most widely criticized perspective on ethics, which is called the Georgetown 4 or principalism. And you've got the key text there if you either bother to looking it up. And then there's a little commentary because this has been this particular approach. I mean, this book has been around for 50 years now. And it's the idea that we have a range of principles or ideas that we're trying to maintain fidelity to when we're working in the health space. So any clinicians amongst us, in any of the ethics module you did as part of your training, you've probably come across this. For designers or more technically minded, you may not have seen these things. But basically, in ethics and practice in the healthcare space, we've got 4 kind of principles that that we're trying to show fidelity to in the work that we're doing. Just the academic in me dies hard. There's other perspectives. These are well debated and criticized, and you can choose any framework you like to help you make these decisions. This is the most approachable and most widely used approach because of that approachability. And so there's 4 things we kind of want to be working towards. The first is autonomy. And so our idea here is that we're promoting human autonomy. We are giving people or empowering people to live in a way that best suits them, that works for them, that we are empowering them to make decisions, to take responsibility for what they want to do. And so that in research terms is when we talk about informed consent. AI research has really tipped this on its head because prior to the huge amounts of data that people are looking to access, we were in sort of standard clinical RCT kind of randomized controlled trial designs where we would ask people, do they want to be in this study? Here's what you can expect. Can we have your data, or can we take this these materials from you? Can we do all this sort of stuff? And so the idea that we're acting in a way that promotes or respects people's individual autonomy. AI, we've got organizations in procedural ethics, the Confidentiality Advisory Group, CAG, which is a place where you can access data without getting anyone's consent or getting the individual's consent. You obviously need the data controller. I think I heard Salim's aneurysm from here when I said you don't need any consent. So that's one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we do. The second key thing about ethics and practice is beneficence. Is the idea that we are doing good. And so all of you, I'm sure, at the core of what you're doing is you're trying to promote beneficence, is to ensure that we are maximizing the good in anything that we do. And those can be quite complicated questions related to utility or about utilitarianism. Are we doing the most benefit for the most people? Those kind of things, which links us very quickly to maleficence, is our non-maleficence. And if beneficence is maximize good, non-maleficence is minimize harm. So anytime you're making decisions through your development process about how am I going to make sure this is really good for lots of people and how am I going to mitigate against any potential risks and harms, those decisions, while you might be approaching them as design decisions or you might be promoting them as sort of marketing decisions, we manage to save lots of people and not harm anyone, they have core ethical dimensions. And so we need to be careful that we're weighing those up clearly and obviously and explicitly. And then our final one is justice. These 4 have been created, I guess, a backdrop of the previous book that I recommended to you, the Occasional Human Sacrifice, where development of healthcare and health technology and pharmaceuticals really was for people like me. For the most part, we focused on blokes. Here's yet more recommendation. I had a physiologist once tell me that there's four types of people. 4 or 3. Yeah, 4 types of people: children, men, women, and pregnant women, which was quite shocking to me. So if you haven't seen this, this is a book not about AI, but about data, and it's called Invisible Woman. And the stat that by not including people in our research, we have done at least 2 things. One, we've limited the benefits. So our beneficence is restricted because it works best for particular kinds of people. If you even just open up that link, you'll see that women, if you're in a car accident, you're 40%, 47, nearly 50% more likely to be more seriously injured than a man. And that was simply because the crash test dummies were based on average male anatomy in terms of body shape, mass, all those kind of things. So the seatbelt just works better for your average dude than it does for other people. You can't tell, but I'm 2 meters tall, so the seatbelt's probably not working hugely well for me either, because I don't think they design it for human-like praying mantises when they're in the car. But these are considerations that AI have actually brought to the fore for us, because we've started to become slightly cleverer, although we weren't initially. But if you ask your favorite social scientist what was going to happen, I'm sure they would have said to you very quickly that I think this is, hang on, stay there, share, I want to go to the chat, do that we have lots of biases that we are building into our algorithms all the time. So you've got some references about there. So justice is the one that I want to focus on for the next little while, because I think it's the easiest for us to get our heads around, and the ones that we actually are starting to deal with in the most effective way. And I'm sure there's probably some eyes rolling about the bias and mitigation factors that we can use there in our design. But it's important that it's considered as an ethical approach rather than just a regulatory one, which is why I want to go back to that question about justice, is that which groups and communities we not helping. Any Simpsons fans amongst us? I hope, yeah, brilliant. I can see one. Do you remember the episode when Homer said, I'm a white male, age 18 to 49. Everyone listens to me no matter how stupid my ideas are. And then he proceeds to eat a bag of gum and nuts. So that's the kind of thing that I think we need to think about. And even Kevin, when we're talking about things like mental illness or mental health, yes, they're absolutely they're universal, but they're also heavily contoured by communities, cultural aspects, historical approaches, all sorts of different things. So which groups and communities are we not helping? And the only way that we can help them is if we actually include them. Now, this is probably very include them, but we should be doing this when you're developing a product or tool. You should be actually talking to the kind of people that you want to be helping, like your stakeholders that we said earlier, to bring them in as early as possible. That will help you, 1, define what the problem is you're actually solving. 2, identifying, is it really a problem for these particular people, or is it us as developers or ethicists or clinicians that are saying, oh yeah, this is a problem, I've got a way to fix this. We should, and we'll be labeling this for those that PPIE. We've formalized that and we've structured it. That's a I, not a, and maybe if I do that, it'll be better. Patient public involvement and engagement. If we can build this into our processes, if you're not engaging with the public or patients now, start. because you'll be able to better understand the kind of solutions that you can offer, better persuade hospital trusts to develop your tool when you've got clear evidence that's going to help the people you actually want to. And that's, I guess, back to the milk. This is why I think it's primarily an ethical question, but one that gets wrapped up in our bureaucratic processes. If you remember, I said earlier, the bureaucratic processes are going to ask us to do things we should be doing anyway. An idea of justice is making sure that we are including them not only in our data sets, but in our decision-making processes, and we do so meaningfully, making sure that we actually, rather than just go, oh yeah, I spoke to 4 people about our product and they liked it, is to have clear, why is it doing that? Public interests. I'm not sure why it's highlighting it as I write. Click there. And user stories. These take on an ethical development where we're trying to address or trying to mitigate algorithmic bias. I'm just going to put bias because I'm not sure I can fit algorithmic into the screen. But if we make sure that we have a clear public interest and public engagement approach, we have clear user stories to understand how that we're addressing the particular problems that people actually have. I'm reminded of an e-learning team where I wanted to improve my technological use in the lecture theatre. And I went and asked them, you know, I want to be able to make it so that I could put a paper or a document on screen and then the students could edit it or annotate it in the session. And they said, oh no, we don't do that. We can't do that. And then they proceeded to try and get me to use about 50 different things that wouldn't actually help me personally in the classroom because they'd designed it from an excellent design perspective, not considering the idiot that was going to be trying to use it in the classroom. So making sure that we've got user stories about what people want. And then, of course, the overall strategy or aim to do that is to be mitigating biases. And one of the key ways that you can do this is if you check out the, I want to go here to the chat. We've got the AI knowledge repository. And then in conversation with the Ada Lovelace Institute, we have developed, or they have developed, I say we, I had nothing to do with it, sadly, is a algorithmic impact assessment. So I think you spoke before about data protection impact assessments, DPIAs. These particular tools will ask you a bunch of questions that you can go through those kind of reflective questions that we talked about earlier and start to assess in meaningful ways the extent to which you're baking bias into your systems. In my opinion, it is impossible not to have biased systems because we're going to be importing information that is imperfect. It will reflect either explicit biases in which the data was generated. That's the classic example in the Science article I shared about with the same symptoms, assuming that white patients were sicker and needed intervention more than black patients. So that reflected the bigotry and prejudice that was within the medical system that was baked into the data that people are accessing, all the way through to if we're using any unstructured data, we think we're accessing good notes from clinicians, but actually we're accessing, given an imperfect memory from someone that was under the pump trying to capture as many things that were going on at the time which they were recording the notes at time. So so with these mitigation, with this document, I'll let you work through that at your own pace and own time. But we can divide those kind of ethical concerns or ethical concerns within there to being, come on. I'm very tempted to see what would happen with that rainbow effect. If you're good, I'll use the rainbow effect at the end.
That's just a question that's coming from Chris on
thank you.
your sort of reference to PPIE. So I think essentially the technologies for clinicians and administrators, so they're impossible to answer request for an explanation as to how they engage with patients. Have you got a thought how to kind of respond to that question when asked?
Yeah, easy. Ignore, well, not ignore, focus on one P. So it's patient and public. So we can say that, and that's a shortcoming of how I talked about including the communities that you want to work with. If your community is the professional community, then they are the people that you need to engage with. I've worked on a case with this. It's a company that's using video footage and wants to access and record video data from surgeries. And they went and did a lovely piece of public engagement work where they talked to everyone that was going to be having this particular surgery and what they thought of the tool. And it was all a massive waste of time because it was actually for the surgeons. It was to understand the communication patterns, and they were trying to predict, if I raise my left eyebrow, is that going to be a precursor that I've made an incision that's too large that's more likely to result in infection down the line? They were looking for those kind of things. So go back to who is this for? And if it's for them, that's the group that you include. And that's the exact answer I'd give to anyone. This tool is for this community of surgeons, of nurses, of administrators. So I've gone and I've spoken to them. The patients may not be who, and that's those three questions. What problem are you solving? Whose problem is it really? It's not really the patients in this particular situation, or it might be, but who's going to use your product? Who's it for? Go and talk to them. So yeah, ignore one of the P's, or one of the P's may not be particularly relevant for you in that time. Thanks for flagging the question. That's great. And I hope the answer's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Cass. It's Chris. Thanks for that.
No worries.
I think if I can just come back to that though, I find it very frustrating that we are continually asked by NHS organisations to outline how it is that we engage with patients, and to the extent that actually would be marked down if we don't engage with patients. And it's quite difficult, therefore, to say, well, we don't engage with patients. Our services are for clinicians and administrators. And I find that rather difficult and rather frustrating.
It is difficult and it is frustrating. And those kind of procurement processes, I would just answer the question and the way that you've engaged with these groups for who it's for. I certainly wouldn't advocate any kind of deceit in saying the patients I spoke to all think it's lovely by sort of a control blind clinician for patient. But I think it's important to be clear that you've engaged. You could account for how you've engaged in the process. And hopefully you just have some reasonable administrators on the other end of that. I know the organizations that I work with focus much more on engagement with communities rather than patients. So perhaps there's a way to talk about, rather than to use language like communities or groups or users or those.
Yeah, that would be better. That would actually be more realistic, because I don't believe that we're the only provider of solutions specifically for clinicians and administrators, and who therefore don't engage with patients. But still, we still do work that benefits patients further downstream. We just can't show the interaction with them.
That's exactly what I was about to say, is that in NHS you have to be very clear about what the patient benefit is, but that might be from improved workflow or a better, well-rested clinician who can listen more carefully to them. So I think, being clear about what patient benefit is really important, but that might not, that might be a second order thing rather than the first order of who you're talking to. So I do hope that's helpful, but being clear about the group and the community that you're engaging with. And I think, personally, you've probably figured out, I'm not shy of opinion. I think those kind of workflow improvement for clinicians is where the biggest gains are to be made for some AI solutions rather than the really sexy stuff around diagnosis. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cass.
Pleasure.
I think the name is misleading, isn't it? And I think some people who perhaps don't understand the process as much will expect patient, but as you say, that really encompasses the people that are going to be using it and impacted. But I can see that I think people can be frustrated by that. But as you say, there is an impact on patients ultimately of you engaging with the clinicians involved or the administrators involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So making sure in that situation, just to underscore, if you have a formal process, that would be my key piece of advice for those kind of, if you have a formal process where you had a particular event or a day or whatever it was, a series of ongoing discussions, you can describe that system very clearly and very well, and then just say that it was involving these clinicians or these users, or show the quality of the process, rather than just thinking about which group have I actually spoken to. So think about using robust and gold standard engagement activities, and if you communicate them, lead with them to then show how you've actually engaged in that meaningfully, that does improve the scores in procurement rounds in NHS, at least in my experience. But there's people, I think, still on the call that are more experienced than me with that. Let's do two things, and I'll try and get us to knock off early if that works for everyone. So when we're thinking about ethical risks, we can break them down, this ethics and practice for AI work, into two broad camps. The first is epistemic, and this is about the quality and trustworthiness. I'm just going to do that because I'm not sure if trustworthiness of the systems that we produce. This is where most of the conversation happens, and this is one that you're probably already kind of familiar with, because, like I say, these conversations are happening already. So let's unpack that very quickly, and then we'll move on to the normative stuff. So the epistemic concerns, coming from epistemology, is the idea about whether our systems are building or providing us with information that we can trust, or are they generating unreliable, opaque, or even misleading information. And the problem that we have here, and something to be communicating, either thinking through as an ethicist or communicating to any of these particular groups, is that our AI outputs are usually probabilistic rather than causal. So we've got a long history of working very hard to try and demonstrate causality through things like RCT design, or other approaches to meta-synthesis, meta-analysis, all the kind of things that we can do to try and demonstrate causality, as challenging and complicated as that is. The problem that we're going to have, or making sure that we're addressing as AI developers, is that where our claims are usually probabilistic rather than causal. So we might be picking up, like an example, I'm a bit of a Luddite, which I probably shouldn't have said. I usually have an analog watch, but I've taken the back off it because I need to replace the battery, but no smart stuff for me. But we could have a smartwatch that's generating, saying that someone's having a particular irregular heartbeat. And obviously this could be a result of sensor error. It could be software error, or many other things before it's a medical condition. So we need to think about the quality and trustworthiness of the information and data that we're using in the building of the system, so that we're making sure that we're building reliable and quality stuff, which means, of course, you need to have reliable and quality data to build your tools. So it's a really strong ethical imperative for you to be using the best quality data that you can. And if you need to access the best quality data, then you should talk to groups like the AI Centre to help do that, for a plug. Other things that we have in epistemic concerns is inscrutable evidence. So most of the systems that I'm familiar with are something of a black box, and that replicates, actually, in lots of ways, our thinking and communicating processes. We don't actually clearly understand the motivations behind lots of our own actions and how we did it. We probably try and rationalize it after the fact in the stories we tell ourselves, or our fallible memories that we're trying to pull back on. But in the world of the tools that you're developing, it's really challenging from an epistemic perspective to know how we're going to justify the decisions, how we're going to interrogate the decisions, and how we can have transparent decision making, which is a balancing act for all of you. I'm going to resist the urge to draw a little set of scales there, to making sure that you're balancing the idea of quality outputs versus explainable outputs. And we can accept that sometimes there's explainable, we can't exactly explain to how the correct decision was reached, but it's something that we're going to have to build into our design and our communication around our tools. So these are the epistemic risks about unclear, inexplicable, or biased evidence. And that's going to threaten our ability to maximize the good, minimize harm, and of course, be just. Our normative concerns, these are much more around, I'll come back. I tried to move that. It might work. This is much more about the values and the social consequences of the systems that we develop. Our key concern, obviously, here with our normative things about the values that we're producing is unfair outcomes. And that algorithmic assessment tool that I gave you will be a really good way for you to reflect meaningfully on, are we generating either unfair outcomes? So let's do a quick clear all. If data, I'm going to put replete, it's not a word I use enough, is replete with structural inequalities, then we're at risk of doing two things. One, repeating those, and two, making it worse. A basic example of something like this is if your tool or system predicts better outcomes for patients who already have greater access to care, it's going to further exacerbate disadvantage amongst underserved populations. This is a challenge in your world if you're developing a tool as a commercial endeavor, because the people with more access to care by definition will have more money and might be more likely to be a customer base for you. So there is a baked-in normative concern about the profit motive, meaning we're going where we can generate the cash, perhaps, rather than where we can generate the most important or meaningful change. Along there, we can see there's not just outcomes, but obviously our tools have an ethical element about changing relationships. And this is a function of all relatively new technologies. As part of my PhD training, we would work in hospitals alongside the clinical ethicists. And it was literally my first day where they had done some genetic screening for someone to receive a transplant. And it turned out that they tested both the parents, but dad, who thought he was biological dad, was not biologically related to his child. And this would be entirely new information for him, certainly. Obviously wasn't a problem until we wanted to do some genetic screening. Same with the kind of AI tools that we develop. We might be affecting relationships interpersonally. We might be shifting power away from patients and clinicians towards automated systems. We already have with things like guidelines, we sort of do that already, that a clinician's job is in lots of ways in the diagnostic process is to identify the best evidence and follow that guidance that sits outside them. We're moving that decision-making potentially towards automated systems, meaning perhaps in our discussion earlier that we're not just empowering clinicians, but perhaps taking power away from them, which of course has ethical considerations for patient and public autonomy. Kevin, go for it.
Sorry, I would. This is an interesting area. I suppose the question I was going to ask was,
yeah.
Actually, I'll come back in a second because I need to reformulate it. It's going to sound like garbage if I ask it the way I asked it now. Yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes. Yeah.
So I've been talking garbage for the last 40, nearly an hour, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But the idea that the normative concerns can be not just we're very fixated on, and the development community are very fixated on mitigating bias in the data set, garbage in, garbage out, but also thinking about those power relationships and the autonomy that we are enhancing or potentially taking away as a key normative concern. And of course, we'll finish on this one, what's the story with accountability for your particular system? Have I got the book here? I haven't read it. It's one of my all-time favorites. That's called Technological Society by a long dead grumpy Frenchman called Jacques Ellul. And he studied the development of technology. And something that he identified, again, which links us to that conversation, is no one wants to take responsibility for anything. I have been, as a researcher, stuck between two committees, neither who would give me approval because they said you got to get the approval from the other one first, and you're in this Kafkaesque nightmare of what on earth am I supposed to do? But the accountability, who's accountable for the use and for the use of the things that if something going wrong, there will be a legal component, but there's an ethical consideration for you there as well as who's accountable. Is it poor use by the patient, the clinician, the hospital? Is it your fault for something that's been baked into your device? I don't have an answer for you, but ethical oversight becomes really hard to implement. And the risk that we're running there is the trust in the system erodes further, and we know that our underserved communities already have less trust. If you think about vaccine uptake, it's mostly, apart from the sort of very white middle class, gluten intolerant who aren't really sort of brigade, but we've got it amongst disadvantaged communities who are already rightly untrusting of the medical establishment and technological developers. So they're missing out even further. So they're eroding the trust even further. So those are our two, I guess, big challenges around normativity, about the power, where's it moving to and from, and who's accountable.